Well, when I'm not busy organising the dinner, what I do for my work is work with mines and mining companies that are basically struggling and trying to get their risk and safety practices to get better traction on the ground. So finding ways to help them implement things, and the end game being obviously to stop injuries, but primarily the stuff I look at is stopping those injuries that have the potential to become fatalities. So trying to draw a differentiation between the paper cuts and the sprained ankles and the near misses and the broken fingers or whatever that could have become fatalities. And today I want to talk a little bit about that, but a little bit also about leadership and how it affects safety. But to start off, I've added just a bit of a slide here. Something I was reading just yesterday is a report by Deloitte on mining safety, and they had a bit of an interesting spin. There's some pretty good research in there, and I'm happy to forward it around to anyone that's interested. But they talked about one of the ways to improve safety was to focus on quality mining, not on the safety itself. So worry about doing things right, doing the mining right, and getting things to work properly, and the safety will sort of flow out of that rather than worrying about safety all the time and focusing on safety itself. I thought it was an interesting concept. What they talked about as well was when they used the term, when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. And I thought that was interesting when we think about medical treatment and LTIs and all the things we measure. We know that when we start to measure them, we start to also try and fiddle them and make the measures work. And the way they put that was when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. I thought that was a good turn of phrase. So I want to today talk about leadership and how it leads to safety in production. I want to use an example from a project I worked on, not when I was a consultant, but when I was actually in a production role a few years ago now, where we did some interesting things around leadership at an underground coal mine in New South Wales, and talk about the benefits that had. Okay, a bit about myself. Well, the story I want to share and the project I want to talk about was at a coal mine I worked at about 5 years ago. When I first arrived there from Queensland, this mine was lagging in safety and in production, and the reason for that was just generally pretty poor leadership practices, a huge divide between management and the workforce. People were sort of disengaged, they were uninterested, and we had a lot of frontline supervisors because of statutory requirements. A lot of frontline supervisors in roles that they didn't want to be in. They didn't want to be in leadership roles, they wanted to be in basically statutory supervision roles. The story I'm going to tell and the project I'm going to talk about doesn't end with me riding off into the sunset as the hero. We did, however, do some interesting things and made some good headway in terms of safety and production. So three parts to my talk. First we're going to talk about leadership. I'm going to talk about the fact that you can learn it. It can be something that people can learn over time and through a number of different ways, and that you can then observe it and track it and monitor it to make sure that the leadership behaviours that you want are actually happening at your mine or your company. So leadership, well, where are we at? Well, I'd say that there's three key factors, and I guess these are more Australia-wide than perhaps Victoria-focused. But there's really three things that are driving the people side of the mining industry going forward. And those are obviously the boom. We've had 120% growth in 10 years, which outstretches nearly even China's economic growth in terms of percentage. We know how much headlines that makes. And doesn't appear to be stopping anytime soon as far as the boom's concerned. We've got the skills shortage. Australia-wide, we're anticipating needing 77,500 more people in the mining industry in the next 4 years, which is actually 40% of the current workforce. There's only about 160-something thousand in the current workforce. And that's on top of, we've already had a 60% growth in numbers in the industry over the last 5 years, since we were at the bottom there. I guess Victoria, the forecast I saw today, even in Victoria we're looking at 4% year-on-year growth in numbers of people in the mining industry. I guess the gold price is obviously going to have a big impact on that. But the skills shortage, and the third one being the ageing workforce. So again, Australia-wide, we're looking at 7% of the workforce retiring in the next 5 years, and in the next 10 years, 16%, or nearly 1 in 5 of the workforce retiring. And replacing those retirements is even in addition to the numbers there on the last slide. I guess my point though about the number of people that are sort of leaving the industry though is the end of the leadership and experience spectrum that they're leaving from. It's the people who are most experienced and perhaps in our management and leadership positions make up a lot of those numbers for the people that are facing retirement. So where has this left us? Well, it's basically left us in a position where we're having to promote people earlier, a lot earlier, into supervisory positions and onwards, and people without necessarily the extensive experience or the training in the leadership skills that they might need in those roles. A recruitment company called BDI did a study, and they looked at leaders who'd been recently promoted into their positions, and they asked them about why did they get offered the promotion, and also why did they take the promotion. And what they found was that half of the leaders that they surveyed got promoted to leadership positions that had for reasons that had nothing to do with their leadership skills. The reasons they got promoted were because it was rewarding their expertise in the role, were because of their educational background, because they asked, or simply because there was no one else to fill the role. And I'm sure we can think of examples of that at our own operations. On the flip side then, they asked those people who got promoted, well, why did you take the promotion? Why did you take the leadership role up in the first place? And more than half of them said they took it up for the money. Only 1 in 4 of those newly promoted leaders said they actually took that leadership position because they wanted to lead people. More than half said they did it just for the money. Now I think in the mining industry, and I guess in my experience, we have a tendency to promote people, particularly at the supervisor level, but even into the middle management ranks, to promote people based on being the best at the skill set of the team they're in. So they were the best truck driver, and now they're the production supervisor. And I think when we look at that and combine that sort of thought with those results of that study, and then we add in all the new complexity and all the new systems that we have to deal with at our mines, all the different new reporting structures and legislation, all the different new things that supervisors have to do, we're putting a heap of load on these potentially inexperienced supervisors and leaders who were also potentially promoted for the wrong perhaps main reasons. And how do we see this in our operations? Well, it's evidenced by things like poor communication. We see supervisors not going and focusing on supervising the high-risk activities, not focusing their efforts on making sure those are being managed well. We see not enough time and maybe not enough willingness to address poor behaviours in the workplace. On the safety side, we see a lack of hazard identification as a key part of the job step. So we don't see people identifying their hazards well enough. We see paperwork that's being done at the crib room at the end of shift instead of being done on the job when people are actually looking at the hazards. We see safety programs that just don't get the traction that they should, big money spent and no results. What we want is we want our leaders to be what I call effective leaders. And what do I mean by effective leaders? We mean we want them to be doing the right things. And then, as a result, we want them to be getting more done. More from themselves and more from their teams. What we typically have now, though, is our supervisors and our kind of middle managers stuck doing 3 main things. Spending nearly all their time doing administration, fighting fires, and then what little time they have left gets diverted to special projects, improvement projects and risk assessments and all those other sort of things. That's what they get stuck doing. When what they really want to be doing, why they probably took the job in the first place, even if they took it because they were the most skilled operator, is they want to be directing and helping and getting to know their team and teaching their team. If they were the best loader driver, they want to be teaching the new loader drivers in their team what they know. But instead, they're caught up in those other 3 activities. So if we can help them to do these things, then in the end, what we're hoping to do is have more effective leaders who can simply get more done. We're all good there, Ben?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, you think so?
I think so. I've got a message that it should be okay.
Alright. So that's leadership. What about safety? Well, where are we at with safety in the industry? Well, we've tried a lot of different things. We've had legislation, we've had prescriptive legislation, now we're moving to less prescriptive legislation. We've used management systems, we've used risk assessment, then we've gone to JSAs and Take 5s, and now most recently we've looked at behavioural based safety observations and trying to manage how people behave. But still, we haven't reached our goal of many businesses, which is zero harm. We've improved a lot, there's no doubt about that, but we've still got some way to go, and we're still trying to figure out what the next step is. These guys did a study a few years ago now. They looked over 5 years, and what they did was they went and studied 73 different projects, safety-related projects, and to see how those projects performed and what the benefits of them were. Out of those projects, what they found was that they all worked, and that there was, but that there was a significant discrepancies in how well they worked. And basically what they found was that the mechanism was important. So the type of project you were doing, whether it was take fires or behaviour-based safety, was important. But that there was something more important underlying all that that made the biggest difference. And this is what they found. They found that the most important factor that was involved in the success of safety initiatives or safety programs was the quality of leadership that those programs were given. PST, a big company that specialises in behaviour-based safety, they did a similar study. They identified these 9 things that lead to better performance of safety initiatives, and in particular their safe behaviour programs. And out of those 9, 7 of them, the ones in red, are related to teamwork and related to leadership. So what is this leadership thing? Can it be taught? Well, I say it probably can't be taught, but it can be learnt. And it certainly can't be best taught in a classroom or in a seminar or in a 5-day workshop, but it certainly can be learnt. Classroom, as I said, is not the way to learn it. We need to teach people things in small bites and then let them go away to their workplace, practice them and give them feedback. The guys at DDI also did a survey as part of their survey.
Keep going.
You're right.
We just got a minor technical glitch from the other side. We're seeing part of the screen, but not all of it. Don't get that. Yep. That's about the best we can do.
Can't do much.
Sorry guys, that's the best we can do for now.
They good? I see them all paying attention down there, so they're obviously good to go. Alright, well, can we learn leadership? Well, there's more books and seminars and webinars and theories that you can poke a stick at management. But again, the guys at DDI went and did the survey, and what they found was that 57% of the leaders that they talked to said that they learned their leadership skills on the job and through their experience. So how can we blend that learning on the job with the short time frame that we now have to bring our leaders up, but also be blending that with some leadership, some sort of teaching of leadership skills. What makes an effective leader though in the first place? Well, it's not just one thing, we know that, and as I said, you can read thousands of different theories about the different types of leadership and what goes into making it. And we can think though, even at our own operations, about a whole lot of different types of leaders that we have. And they all have different personalities, but they all seem to get things done. Some of the leaders of our organisation might be quiet, some might be loud, some might be hands-on, some might be charismatic, some may be overbearing, and others are just plain crazy. We've got them all at our sites, but the one thing they have in common is they all seem to be able to get things done and get their team to work well, no matter what their own personal traits. So how do we draw on these things, and how do we figure out what tools they use, and capture those tools and be able to teach them to our new leaders, and then get those things embedded? And the tools I'm talking about here need to be not textbooks that are based on sort of office management or office leadership. Our tools that we need to use need to be obviously mining specific, they need to be simple, they need to be repeatable, they need to be easily learned and easily tried. But I think most of all for me is that first point. They need to be mining specific. We have an unusual workplace, shifts around the clock, especially with the underground environment, not seeing the people that work for you over a long period of time, and some of the theories that you read just don't apply in the mining environment. So what are some of the tools we can look at, and some of the tools that can work that we can teach people? Well, we can teach them that they need to think about managing behaviours, not attitudes. We can teach them that they need to set clear expectations for their team. They need to set things out up front. We can teach them about feedback. We can give them a feedback model that they can use to make it easy to give feedback. We can teach them to listen and talk safety. And Damien talked earlier about talking to people, not telling them. So having a two-way discussion. We can teach them a coaching model, a little coaching tool that will help them to bring their team along and learn new skills. And we can teach them about one-on-ones, so they're making time to sit down and communicate with the people in their team better. But what we can't do is we can't teach it in a classroom session. We can't give people a textbook, tell them all the models and tell them to go away and try it. And anyone that's been on a leadership course has probably found the same as me. You go out to site full of beans, ready to try new models, and you just find it difficult to introduce them to your environment. What we need to be able to do is teach our leaders things little by little and then coach them along, observe them, track them, give them feedback on how they're going. BSP again, in their survey, they found that when they implemented their behavioural safety programs, on average, when they implement these programs, they get about a 25%, they see about a 25% reduction in injuries. What they found though was when they then involved leadership coaching as part of that and got leaders to coach people on using the behavioural safety tools, they got a 60% further increase in injury reduction. So nearly a 40% increase overall. So leading the leaders, managing the leaders. What we need to be able to do is not just teach guys in the classroom, but we need to be able to have a system to track their behaviours and to coach them along. So back to my story at the coal mine, this is where when I came on board and the new GM started, we realised that we had a challenge to confront with the way our leaders work with their teams. So what we did was we actually drew on the model of our safe behaviour process. We also drew on the model of our weekly maintenance checks on our equipment and developed a leadership observation and a leadership tracking program to make sure that our leaders who've now done the training in some of these simple tools, we're actually doing them and we're making the time to do them. These are the sort of things we got them to report on week to week. We've asked them to check off that they're actually doing some of these things that normally are things they said they were already doing or that they knew they should be doing, giving positive feedback, giving negative feedback, disciplining someone, handing back a hazard report with some positive comments written on it. They're saying that they were doing it, and some probably were, some probably weren't, but we put in a system to be able to track that and to get them to tick it off from week to week. We also then used our safety observation model to get the leaders' bosses to go and observe them at work and give them feedback on how they were doing with communications, with listening and with feedback. And what we're aiming to do was take our supervisors away from these three things that tie up all their time and give them a formal process and formal time to be able to do these things that they wanted to do and that would make them more effective leaders. So what was the outcome of our project? Well, we didn't see huge dramatic turnarounds in the safety or production or culture, but we did see some good turnarounds. The place, in my opinion, became a much better place to work. Our safety statistics improved, our production got back on board, our relationships between management and the workforce and the unions became a lot better. We only rolled this process down to the level above supervisor, so our coordinators. But what we found was it actually trickled down to the supervisor level anyway. They saw better behaviour from their leaders and them in turn. So where does the story end? As I said, it doesn't end with me sailing up into the sunset, but it did leave me with a number of things I learned about the ways that you can and can't teach mining operations how to be better, mining operators to be better leaders. And we've got that quote there, and as I said, the overall outcome was that we found safety and production and everything like that, we're physically getting more done from our leaders and more from their teams. So, to summarise, we know where we're heading as an industry overall. We're heading into the boom, we're heading into a skills shortage, and we're heading into an ageing workforce. We also know where we've been. We've tried a lot of things and they're still working and they continue to work, and it's not that we should let those go. But now we're also starting to see the one thing and the most important thing that underpins all that, and that's leadership. And I guess the challenge now for us as individuals, as mining operations, and as an industry is how we start to rapidly bring up our leaders and give them the right tools that they need to be more effective and to make their mining operations more effective at the same time. Thanks. Any questions?
It sounds like you need to manage this stress, because if you've got a lot of middle supervisors getting elevated rapidly in a very amplifying environment, that's one
Yeah, particularly in the operation that I was at, a lot of those supervisors were promoted exactly for some of the reasons I mentioned, not because they were good leaders, but because they had the statutory ticket, so the deputy's ticket, and they were in that position. That's not what they signed up for, and as soon as you try to then bring new systems from the top down, like feedback and performance reviews and getting them guys to that sort of stuff, they throw their hands up in there and go, this isn't what I wanted to do.
So is the solution just letting that happen and having them leave the industry, or aiding them back without them losing what they half of them went for, the money?
Yeah, well, in our specific case, it was about taking those guys with the stat tickets that didn't want to be supervisors and giving them statutory roles that didn't have a team, and finding a way to be able to promote people without the ticket to be the supervisors. Getting people in the roles that wanted to be leaders was a good start, but we couldn't get that across the board, so that's where we brought in this system of saying, well, you know, we'd go around to every supervisor and say, do you know what feedback is? Yeah. Do you ever give it to your crew? Yeah, all the time. And I'm sure if you went and asked their crew, they'd say they never get any feedback. Same as supervisors would say their superintendent never gives them any, and superintendents say the manager never gives them any. So what I wanted to do was set up a system to say, tick this box, did you, and who did you give it to? Tell me about it. And in theory, they should be pretty accepting of that, because they're saying, well, we do that all the time. Why are you making us just do this paperwork? Well, we're trying to just, the other thing I talk about a lot is creating habits, you know, so getting people into the habit of doing things. When they get hazard reports in, we didn't have a good system like it sounds like at Fosterville. We introduced a hazard reporting system, heaps of hazards got reported, nothing ever got done about them, no feedback ever went back to anyone about the quality of the report or the hazard itself, and within 6 months all the hazard reporting stopped, because the guys went, well, what's the point? And don't flog me for hazard reports if you're not going to do anything about them. So we brought in the system of saying once a week, you guys need to get a hazard report, write on it in red pen. You don't have to do anything complicated, just photocopy it, write on it in red pen. Great report, we'll get that fixed probably next month, and pass it back. And all of a sudden, start to get them guys starting to do it again, and realising that what they're telling you is actually being heard. So.
Just a comment, when we were going through the transition from contractor to owner, one of the things that we started to do was the feedback, and we would actually have the crew discuss, the underground crews discuss, the shift supervisor would sit up front and say, right, did we have anyone, did we have any incidents, they discussed them as a group, did anyone receive any positive feedback?
Yeah, right.
And they got the group talking, and someone said, oh yeah, someone, Geo came in and said that was quite good, or did a great job here, or whatever. And that's where we noticed that we started turning around, and you're right, the supervisors are the key link in any.
Oh, I totally agree with that. I think so, definitely. And their bosses, that other middle level of management who may also have been promoted not because they were a great leader, but because they were a great supervisor or a great operator. I think positive feedback in general is something that people don't really like. Like at the operation where I was at, we didn't do any public positive feedback because it would have thrown people for six. They wouldn't have liked it. It would have created a culture of you're the favourite, and because there was a real them and us attitude. If the GM stood up and said, I'd just like to congratulate Barry for his great hazard report, you'd never get one from him again because he wouldn't want to get embarrassed like that. So you know what? But at that mine, the management were great at giving discipline, shutting the door and yelling at people. They were really good at that, but they weren't much good at. That's right. Yeah, correct. Yeah.
He says something and goes up the line, and then this supervisor goes full on this that, he gets all accreditation for it. All like down the bottom, he goes around and stuff, I'm not going to be better than that.
Yeah, that's right too. Oh yeah, you know what?
I used to work for the government, and that happened.
Yeah, it's probably worse in those
organisations. I can implement this.
Yeah.
And he would get the pat on the back, the poor bloke right down the bottom on the broom.
Yeah.
No, I can help.
And the more people, if you're in a situation probably like the government is quite often, where people are fighting for promotions or position, or you've got a performance review system that gives you more money based on what you've done, you have a big risk of that too, that's for sure. People not giving credit where it's due.
If you can come back to the boss, you get further right, further ahead.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Took me to get ahead.
Yeah.
When I got ahead, I kept on going.
Yeah, no, you did right there.
So really all these people sucked their way right through, and they didn't have a clue on how to lead people.
No.
How to talk to people, and that's the main thing, is talking to the person.
Correct.
You can't talk to the person, explain to them how to do the job, or even show them how to do the job. You shouldn't be a leader, because you've got to know how to do that before you can tell someone else how to do it.
Sure.
So really with the ageing workforce and the people departing, they're departing with their old habits.
True.
What you're saying is we've got a really good opportunity to replace them and a whole generation that only know good habits.
That's also true. Yeah. And we had hoped that was the case at this operation I was at. We had a big fleet of new guys come through. This mine hadn't, when I started there, no one had been employed for 6 years in any part of the business. They just hadn't. The average age of the workforce was 56. Since I started there, because of expansion, they put a lot more people on. And the hope was that, like I said, leave the old habits behind, but there was this, what happened was these guys that had worked there together for such a long time, and they kind of knew how each other worked, and they knew that you had to work hard. This mine was always on the brink of closing, so if they didn't work hard, they had a job. And some of the new guys came in and sort of picked up these habits, bad habits, that the older guys had, you know, that they were able to balance their bad habits with good productivity, whereas the young guys weren't able to balance it with good productivity. So, end of the day though, positive outcomes was what we ended up with was those older guys disciplining and, you know, giving a bit of feedback to the younger guys and saying, you got to pull your weight, basically pull your weight was the message. We kind of get the slack off because we've been here 35 years and we're the supervisor in the crew, but you don't, you've got to earn your stripes. And these are guys that weren't allowed to drive in the coal mine, you know, continuous miners and the cutting equipment for 15 years. They weren't allowed to. You had to work next to it for 15 years before you're allowed to drive that, let alone be a supervisor. And they're trying to deal with new guys coming in after 6 months driving the big machines because, you know, we're trying to not promote seniority and all that stuff, but it had a downside as well. So. But yeah, you're right. Hopefully, if you can do a good job of it, there's an opportunity, that's for sure. All right. Oh yeah.
Just wondering, was there any focus on employing new recruitment as far as new baseline personnel? So people who are assertive, but yet you were able to so in other words, to recruit them?
Yeah, not at the mine where I was talking about this project, which was a slightly less mature culture, if you like. The mine I worked out up the road, BHP, we definitely did that, and we looked for a mixer. You know, we didn't want to. We were opening a new part of the mine and employing 30 people to be all the crews. What we didn't want was 30 leaders. We consciously needed to employ like 25 team members, but we did all the personality testing. At the mine I talked about here, things weren't quite so robust. A lot of footy club mate employment, and if your dad worked at the pit and all that, which was fine, but there wasn't a lot of rigour, and mainly because they hadn't put anyone on for 6 years. They didn't even know how to add anyone to payroll or do anything, let alone recruit. Yeah, good. I left that mine probably 18 months after, but I know now that a lot of them guys that we were recruiting for operators, but we were able to pick out people that we thought would be good supervisors in the future. And I know that a lot of them have, and I know they're still in supervisory roles. I'm not sure how well they're going, but certainly when they worked for me, they were excellent. I'd never been on the side of the table looking at all these site testing results and all that teamwork exercise, and it's fascinating what they draw out of it, and it does